My Parents Tried to Poison Me, written by author JoJo, and narrated by M. Frightmare. "You're an evil little thing." That's the first thing I remember my mother ever saying to me. I'm sure she had said other things, but my first memory of her voice was tainted by those words. That sentence became something of a mantra for her. The way it would roll off her tongue so naturally that you would think it was almost a term of endearment. Every time she spoke it, I could feel the flames behind her words. Cruel words. I grew up with that mantra in my mind. You're an evil little thing. As she grew up, I looked for the meaning behind her hatred. I looked for why my dad would just sit at the dining room table and let my mother verbally abuse me, why he would never pay much attention to me at all. They would put out food for me and wake me up when it was time for school, but other than that, it was like a ghost in their house, haunting my way from one room to another. At some point, as the years went by and I grew taller, the slick words from my mother nestled into my head, and I began to believe them. Constantly convinced that there was something wrong with me, I would try to distance myself from people. I didn't want to hurt anyone, or have anyone hate me. I just became the weird kid in the back of the class. Eventually, I would get some answers. Normally, I wasn't allowed to go to the family gatherings, but my grandmother had asked if I could go, so my mother caved. Not without chiding me to be respectful to everyone, and to keep my mouth shut. I learned a few things that day. The first thing I learned is that my grandmother liked her booze, despite not being able to help them. I found myself alone with my grandma, while everyone else talked to each other in the backyard. I had guessed that my parents forgot about me, something they were fairly good at doing. My grandma must have felt sympathy for me. She must have been aware of how her daughter was treating me. She told me that I came along when no one else was expecting me, that my parents weren't planning to have a kid, but I came along anyway. My mom had big dreams, the kind you have to put aside when you have a child. She and my father both changed their lives for me. Grandmother told me that I was born prematurely with a load of complications, so they had to spend every waking moment making sure that I was okay. As she told me about the circumstances of my birth, I watched my parents talking outside and wished that I could still receive that kind of love from them. That talk had to end, though. That night had to end. We returned home, and I understood why it didn't stop their cold behavior towards me. All it did was make me wish that I had never come along at all. The years went by like that. I left middle school and was thrown into the wild, unforgiving world of high school. Then, before I knew it, it was coming up on my 18th birthday. I couldn't explain why, but I was excited about it. After gathering my nerves, I approached my mom to ask her if I could spend the night at another girl's house, someone I had vaguely made friends with. I saw that she was about to refuse, but my bold attitude already in place, I pleaded further. Her eyes dropped, and she agreed to my wishes. Surprise is the only word that came to mind. She had never buckled before. We ate dinner, and I started counting down the days, thinking that things might start turning around. I could make friends, and with me being older, my parents wouldn't have to look over me so much. Maybe they'd resent me less. Days ticked on, and I went to school with brighter eyes. Brighter eyes that started to feel heavy. Each passing day, it felt like it was harder and harder to drag myself out of bed. My limbs were moving sluggishly, and no matter how much sleep I got, it felt like a battle just to keep my eyes open. My parents let me stay home from school, and I had hoped with enough rest that I might be right as rain for the party. The day came, and I felt worse than the days before. Muscles ached with every movement, and I could see the color draining from my skin. There was a dark purple haze resting under my eyes. I tried to play it off, just wanting one night all to myself, but my mother insisted, firmly, that I stayed home. She handed me a pill and told me to take it, that once I got better, I could always reschedule another party. She even smiled at me when she handed me the water. It looked like the resentment that she had been harboring for me all those years had finally melted away. As she walked out of the room, she gave me one more look to watch me take the medicine before vanishing from my view. With the pill slowly digesting inside of me, I turned around and rested my head on a pillow. All my body wanted to do was sleep, and in time my world went dark. I woke up several hours later with the world still surrounded in twilight. At first, I was feeling better. It hurt less to move my limbs, and I was able to climb out of bed. Slowly, I made my way to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror after flicking on the light. There were still dark bags under my eyes, but I could also see that my eyes had become bloodshot, thin trails of red creeping into the white. As I stared into the mirror, I was able to see the red taking over more and more in my eyes. Suddenly, there was a churning in my stomach that was painful enough to buckle me over. I didn't mean to, but I let out a gasp that was a little too loud, echoing through our silent house. I heard the creaking of the floorboards as I prepared to be yelled at. Instead, my father solemnly rounded the corner and reached out a hand. I took it, and he helped me stand up straight again and offered me a familiar pill with his free hand. When getting out of bed, I felt fine, so I figured the pill had worked. It had just worn off or my body wasn't used to it yet. The pill fell down my throat, and my father helped me back to bed. He brushed strands of my hair from my face before saying goodnight to me. Its warmth brought me gently into the world of the living. I moved slowly to see my body was reacting to the medication. I had to make it slow and soft movements and be able to move without much pain, so I pulled myself out of bed. My stomach was aching as I realized I hadn't eaten in quite some time. Pulling myself to the stairs, I could hear my parents talking, though their words were in contained whispers. I couldn't hear everything they said, but the bits and pieces managed to make their way up the stairs. They were talking about the medication that they had been giving me, that it didn't seem like it was having the desired effect. I made note of hiding my pain when I finally made it down the stairs to show the pills were working so I could go back to school. Seeing that I was more mobile, I was rewarded with another pill. The first real good look I got at the pill. A small pink pill with a C ingrained on it. Whatever it was, it seemed to be working, so I took it and went through the rest of the day. I tried to keep myself out of bed, despite feeling so drowsy. I figured if all I did was sit around, my muscles were bound to ache. Though, as the day went by, my illness returned. I kept taking those pills day after day, and while I would feel okay for a while, the pains would return worse than they were before. After a few days, even with the pill's effects, I found it hard to turn over in bed. I kept asking my parents for a doctor, but they said the doctor they spoke to suggested a higher dose of the pills. Realizing that I had been blindly putting my trust in my parents, I decided to take a chance and not take a pill. When my mother handed it to me, I rolled my tongue so the pink pill would just sit behind my bottom gums. My mom checked my mouth and seemed convinced that I had swallowed it and walked out of the room, leaving me to spit the pill back into my hand. I laid in bed for hours, and soon enough the pain returned, though this time it didn't hurt as much as before. It was still a lot though, the pain in my stomach causing me to curl into a ball on the bed. I tried to rub those sore spots on my hands and legs, and it felt like my bones were trying to get out of my body. Most noticeably was that I wasn't feeling tired. After taking a pill, I would normally fall asleep within an hour or two, but laying there, I felt nothing. This meant that I was up when I wasn't supposed to be, and at the stillness of the night, I heard my parents speaking once more. They must have counted on the side effects of the pill, because they weren't speaking quiet like before. No, their voices bounced around the house until landing in my room. My mother was expressing confusion, stating that the pill should have finished it by now. I assumed that they were talking about my illness. That was until I heard my dad speak. He was a man of few words, but the ones I heard him speak that night were particularly powerful. She's a fighter, but it's almost over. I could feel my lip quivering, and it was hard to believe how calm and collected they were covering the topic. Then his final words. That evil little thing will be gone soon. I didn't even have time to process what I had heard. When their conversation finished, I could hear the stairs creak as my father ascended them. I stuffed my pill in my pillowcase and tried my best to pretend that I was asleep through the pain. There and then I decided to quit taking the medication. Day after day I hid the pills. The aching continued, but it got easier to manage each day, and I felt like it was getting better. I just needed to get healthy enough to make an escape, to be able to run away, maybe to my grandma's house. Then on the night of my 18th birthday, the one I had hoped I could spend with friends, everything became clear to me. The pain started to go into overdrive, and I barely managed to stumble into the bathroom while stifling my cries of pain. I stared at my hands. The feeling of my bones trying to escape radiated. The skin on my hands started to stretch. I couldn't believe what I was seeing as my palm extended, lengthening my hand. My digits wriggled and cracked, becoming longer as well, resembling claws more like fingers than they were before. Looking at myself in the mirror again, I could see my eyes becoming more and more bloodshot, until eventually, I couldn't see any white in them at all. The more the pain continued, various parts of my body shifted around, the stronger I began to feel. The clattering of teeth spilling from my mouth to make room for the new sharper fangs. The mirror no longer showed the same dainty frame as before. The pills they gave me, the poison they tried to feed me. They weren't trying to kill me because I was in the way of their dreams. They were trying to kill me because they were scared of me. I don't know all the details of my birth, the sudden pregnancy, and the short term. I don't know all the complications when I was young. But I do know that Mommy was right, that I intended to show her just how right she was. I am an evil little thing.